Hey Internet, this is Nate, and welcome to my video on 5 ways that games have improved on Vampire Survivors. Now, Vampire Survivors, if you've looked at my last tier list of Swarm Survivor games, still at the top. I think it's the most complete package in terms of the variety, the art style, the sound. Like, it's all very, very high quality. However, other games have managed to improve certain aspects of Vampire Survivors, and I want to highlight those games and the way that they improve on the Swarm Survival recipe. So, starting with number 1, if we look at the collection in Vampire Survivors, we have lots of different weapons and lots of different accessories. And what you may not know, or maybe you do know, is that there actually is a rarity system behind different weapons and different accessories. It's hidden, you don't know about it unless you kind of know how the game is designed, but it is there. So let's switch to a game, Rogue Genesia. Rogue Genesia has very, very similar concept, where you have different card rarities. However, let me go back, sorry. They're much more explicit. So you have these kind of tainted cards, you have normal cards, you have uncommon cards, and rare, and then finally, you know, epic, heroic, and ascension cards. And what's really nice about this kind of like larger pool of rarities is it makes it much more clear whether a card is, you know, going to be better or worse. And it also gives you that kind of like thrill of getting an extremely rare card. So oftentimes you'll have cards that do very similar things. Unlike in Vampire Survivors, you'll have one accessory that adds additional projectiles. But in Rogue Genesia, you have 4 or 5 different cards that add projectiles, but they have different ways they do it. The highest rarity one, multi-handed, just straight up adds additional projectiles. No downside at all. However, if you get into some of the lower rarity items, you'll get things like trade-off, where you gain a projectile at the loss, or sorry, not trade-off, clumsy, where you gain a projectile for a loss of defense. Or, where's the other one? There is another one as well that is a very similar thing. Is it trade-off? No, trade-off is the reverse, where you lose projectiles, but you gain a bunch of attack speed. So a lot of these lower cards will have these kind of like heavy trade-offs, but then the higher rarity ones will be similar, but with less of a trade-off or with more of a positive advantage. So I really like this a lot. I think it's out of all the games that have come out in the Swarm Survival genre, I think it does it the best in terms of different rarities, the excitement of getting higher rarity things, the ways that you can manipulate rarities through meta progression and through artifacts. I think that all combines for a really, really positive experience when it comes to collecting different kinds of weapons and different kinds of stat improvements. So next, we also know that Vampire Survivors has a very healthy roster of characters. However, the character differentiation is very light. So what will differentiate your character is their base stats, a kind of progressive stat, and then the weapon that they start with. And while that can lead to very different styles of runs, to be honest, a lot of the runs kind of merge together the later the game goes in a run, to where, you know, each character, while at the beginning might seem very different, by the end, a lot of them end up feeling the same. And some characters even share basically the exact same attribute, like the 4 or 5 characters that give you increased projectiles every 20 levels. So let's talk about a game that improves on this, and I'm going to refer to Brotato. So Brotato, another kind of new-ish Swarm Survivor. Brotato also has a ton of different characters. About as many, or probably even more than in Vampire Survivors, but each character is crazy different than other characters. So well-rounded, it's very standard. But let's look at some of like these really weird ones, right? So let's talk about like Old. So Old increases enemy speed, decreases the map size, decreases your speed, decreases the number of enemies. Very, very different style. Or we get like really weird stuff, like the Pacifist, where you gain materials based on unkilled enemies, and you get minus 100% damage and minus 100% engineering. Or you take the engineer, who starts with heavy engineering, but all damage modifiers reduced by 50%. And what you end up with is that every character feels very, very unique, even though they're using the same set of accessories, even though they're using the same weapon set, because of how extremely different their kind of characteristics are. They all feel very unique. And so you end up with all these different runs where you're playing the same map, but it feels completely different because, now I'm playing as the bull and my whole goal is to run into enemies. Or now I'm playing as one-armed, so I only get one weapon and I have to build around that one weapon. Makes for a very, very different and a kind of heavy variety of experiences. In a very similar vein, this is going to be number 3. Each character does start with a unique weapon, but in Vampire Survivors, every weapon is interchangeable. So basically what ends up happening is that, yes, you can pick different characters and they each have a different weapon they start with, and no two characters will start with the same weapon. Everyone has a unique one. I think apart from like Red Death and Missing No. But again, every character can get every weapon, and there's nothing special about the fact that they start with that weapon, apart from the potential to get Arcanas to modify your starter weapon. So we're going to highlight another game that also differentiates both weapons, but even further differentiates with special abilities. And for this one, we're going to jump into Holocure. So in Holocure, again, you have a lot of characters similar to Brotato and Vampire Survivors, but each character has a unique starting weapon and a unique special ability. And these are completely different from each other. So while Brotato mixes it up by changing, the attributes of the character, whereas their attributes are kind of largely the same across all the characters in Hololive. Yes, you get some like different stats, but there's no like other real changes apart from just some minor stat changes. Where Holocure completely differentiates is in the starting weapon and the special ability. The starting weapons are, again, completely different. We have a pistol that shoots in, one direction, left or right, depending on where you're facing. We have a trident that swipes in a direction. We have tentacles that will swipe and then create new tentacles that will swipe. We have a bunch of razor sharps, like all these different types of starter weapons and unique special abilities. So again, we get an experience where even though every character can have the same accessories and can have the same supplemental weapons, they all feel super unique because they have their own special attacks, they have their own special abilities, and I haven't even talked about the fact they also have their own special skill upgrades. And I think Hololive, in a very different way than Brotato, where Brotato is really like, we use stats to make really weird statted characters. Holocure uses skills, weapons, and special powers to make every character feel completely unique and play very differently from each other. Okay, next. In Vampire Survivors version 1.0, we finally got the addition of an endless mode with, not here because I haven't for some reason unlocked it in the save file, but you have an endless mode. And the way the endless mode works in Vampire Survivors is after you get to 30 minutes, it will reset back to 0, only the enemies are more difficult, which is interesting. But the biggest problem is that over time, your levels become less and less interesting. And it really just is an exercise in living forever, or as long as you can, rather than continuing to make interesting decisions and having kind of like things change every cycle. And if you contrast that with another game, as soon as it pulls up, Soulstone Survivors also has an endless mode. The way that the endless mode works in Soulstone Survivors is once you've played a level, at the end of the run, you get 2 different doorways. One doorway will just finish the run and it ends. A second doorway will take you to a new map where a whole bunch of modifiers will get impacted, making the map a lot harder, and you'll go through a whole new cycle with brand new bosses, and you'll continue to level and be able to swap out skills, continue to increase stats, and continue that like trend of growing your character. And I find it to currently be the most engaging of all of the endless modes. One, because of the difficulty scaling, which is just crazy. Two, because you actually get brand new maps, brand new combats compared to the first run in the endless sequence. And three, because unlike a lot of the games, when you get to late game, you don't really have much else to upgrade. So like in Army of Ruin or in Vampire Survivors, you're kind of just capped. Here in Soulstone Survivors, you continue to level your stats. You continue to level your weapons. And there's no like end. It's not a limit break where you get just like a random stat to a weapon. It's really like the same leveling you've been doing all game just continues, and there's more and more and more to level. And so for that reason, I think it's by far the best endless mode in the genre right now. And I think it improves on that. If people are looking for a really solid endless experience, I think this is definitely the best in-class endless experience that's available so far. Last but not least, meta progression. So all these different games will have different kinds of meta progression, but they typically are all largely kind of agnostic of your weapons and agnostic of your characters. However, we start to see this evolution where some games have started to introduce character-specific or weapon-specific improvements. And what I want to highlight is what I think is the best current character-specific meta progression model, and that is in Boneraiser Minions. So in Boneraiser Minions, you have several different characters that you can choose from. Oh, let me push the right buttons. Several different characters that you can choose from when you play. Oh, let me go back. Let me go into... Oh, did they change this? Oh, that's interesting. They have this whole new like intro sequence now. Wow, this is... Okay, I haven't played in a while. But basically, you can change what character class you are into a whole bunch of different character classes. But these character classes... How do I back out? I guess we just pick one. Are not just different versions by themselves, but actually we can go back and buy meta upgrades that are class specific. So each class has its own unique meta progression, so that each character can become different. And it's not just straight upgrades. A lot of them end up being side grades. So like, for example, let me grab the Demonologist. So you get extra demon limit, but you reduce health. So every single character has its own unique progression, which I find really, really interesting and really captivating. And I hope that more games will expand on this. Again, making every character feel different, but also having an entire meta progression tied to that character's progression is really, really cool. It's also one of the, I would say, best games in terms of like just in general meta progression, because they're so interesting and different compared to a lot of the other different kinds of meta progressions. So with that, let me hold on, let me go back out. I guess I have to quit. Okay, there we go. With that, again, as I said, I still think that Vampire Survivors, if you haven't started in the genre, is the most complete package. But I wanted to highlight these 5 different games and how they have introduced something on top of the Swarm Survival genre that I think is interesting and that I think is continuing to push the genre in interesting and more fun directions than just like the core what we got out of Vampire Survivors. If you like this video, let me know in the comments. If you want to see more videos of this type, also let me know. But for now, this has been Nate, and this has been, again, 5 ways that games have improved on Vampire Survivors. Peace out.